Good evening. Thanks for joining us. It's been 3 years since Tony Haase was arrested and charged with the murders of Tana Togstead and Tim Mumbrew. This morning, after 4 days of deliberating, a jury voted not guilty to all counts related to those crimes. The couple found stabbed to death in Togsted's home in the town of Royalton in March of 1992. Prosecutors said that DNA had placed Haase at the scene and matched samples recovered from Togsted's body. The defense raising questions, though, on whether Haase gave a false confession and named another possible suspect, Jeffrey Teal, Hase's uncle. He was not charged in connection with the case. He died by suicide in 1995. In a First Alert update, Samantha Cavalli spoke with Hase's attorneys about the case. She joins us from Waupaca County with their reaction.
We were alerted the jury had a verdict at around 10:30 this morning. 30 minutes later, a decision came down that Tony Haase was not the person who committed these violent crimes. It was standing room only Monday inside a Waupaca County courtroom. Judge Raymond Huber reading aloud the verdicts.
We, the jury, find the defendant Tony Garrett Haase not guilty of first-degree intentional homicide of Tana M. Togstead. We, the jury, find the defendant Tony Garrett Haase not guilty of first-degree intentional homicide of Timothy W. Mumbrew.
Haase comforted by his defense team, who helped prove his innocence since day one. Attorney John Birdsall grateful to the jury, who saw what they saw in Tony as a person.
3 years ago today, Tony was arrested. And from the very moment that I met him and Nicole met him and our team did, we were 100% convinced of his innocence.
With over 18,000 pages of discovery, attorney Nicole Mueller says preparing for this case was challenging. When asked about the jury's long deliberation period, she says it was understandable. It was the most attentive jury they have ever seen.
To expect a jury to, with the snap of a fingers, understand that and be able to move quickly, I don't think we ever thought that this was going to be a quick deliberation.
For the Togstead and Mumbrew families, justice is still not served over 30 years later. We attempted to speak with family, but were told to not film and blocked by a sheriff's deputy.
Who knows if one day the truth will come out, but I hope it does for those families.
We've learned that Tony Haase was released from custody not long after the verdict. We asked to speak with the prosecution following the verdict, but they declined to comment. Reporting in Waupaca County, Samantha Cavalli, Action 2 News.